Polly, I was just wondering if you wouldn't mind just get some idea on sort of your early days. Where were you born, or where were you brought up?
I was born in Scotland, near Loch Lomond, and I spent a lot of my childhood on the west coast of Scotland, in Argyllshire, a really beautiful area that had a profound impact on me in terms of living in a land and beside sea that had been really lightly touched by humanity, and a very, very special wild territory actually. It's really has had a lasting impact on me in terms of how I view the earth as really a very sacred place. That it's you know, it is still a patch of paradise, and how we ultimately have a duty to safeguard this beautiful world one way or another. That was something that I think was born into me, and I appreciated from a very, very young age.
What a wonderful start to life.
Yes.
Do you have brothers and sisters?
I do. Younger brother, younger sister, yeah.
So you're out there running wild sometimes?
Yeah. And I was always the rule breaker.
Well, there's nothing plus ça change, eh?
No, life hasn't changed.
Yeah.
First of all, I was up in Aberdeen University, then Glasgow for postgraduate, and then I came down to London, and I studied law down in London.
Yeah.
With a little bit of a foray out to Utrecht in Holland. I studied a diploma in semiology there.
Ah, right.
I qualified as a barrister in 1998.
Was there a sort of an inkling of a change? Could you feel that maybe what was the point at which you felt this isn't quite right?
Yeah, there was definitely a point where I had what I now recognise, I didn't realise it at the time, a critical choice point in my life. And it's often been said that we maybe have 6 or 7 critical choice points in our life, which are opportunities for us to take a very different direction. And one of my critical choice points was a moment when I was in court, and I found myself in the Royal Courts of Justice. It was the last day of a 3-year-long case where I'd been representing an individual who'd been very badly injured and harmed in the workplace. It was a discrimination case, a disability discrimination case. And here we were, it was a court of appeal, and we were waiting for a judgment for the judges to come back in. And I found myself looking out of the window, rather like, here today. And the courtroom I was in was very high up in the building, looking out over the trees and the rooftops and Lincoln's Inn Fields, and my inner mind soared up and out, and I found myself thinking, it's not just my client that's been badly injured and harmed here, so is the earth. Something needs to be done about that. And I found myself thinking, the earth is in need of a good lawyer. And that thought didn't leave me. I actually left that courtroom, and I had won the case in part. It had changed the law at that time on employment law, and I remember going down to my clerks who organised my courtroom scheduling, and they were very excited that I'd really been so successful in this very complex case, and that now, here I could take on really huge cases, that I was punching way above my weight for my call, and they were very excited about this. And I said, I'm going to take a year out. I'm going to examine how do we create a legal duty of care for the earth. It was a huge question that as I walked down from the courtroom, I was asking myself, how do we create a legal duty of care for the earth? And that was 2006, I think. 12 years on, as I had to admit to my bank manager a few years back when she said, when are you going to get back and do big cases? And I had to say that it's too late. I'm on a completely different trajectory now. That changed my life. I had no idea that I would end up being the one who would be crafting and drafting the legislation, and now indeed taking out a huge global campaign right across the world to ensure that ecocide becomes an international crime in the International Criminal Court.
Absolutely. Well, the world certainly got their earth lawyer. We're very grateful for that. Can you define what ecocide is?
Ecocide is, in fact, a word that's been around since the 1970s. What I've done is I've given it legal definition: extensive damage, destruction to or loss of ecosystems of a given territory.
Yeah.
What criminalises that is the perpetrators of senior responsibility. So we're talking about corporate CEOs and directors, we're talking about ministers and heads of states who either permit or cause or contribute to that ecocide through their decision making. And this is about accountability at a corporate and state level, internationally.
Yeah. And so is that both kind of big and small? Could it be a sort of, a fracking thing in a small village in Lancashire, and it could be something, obviously, like a tar sand situation in the States or Canada or...
This is ecological ecocide, where we're dealing with basically state-sanctioned industrial immunity for causing serious harm on a grand scale from industrial activity such as fracking. And the test that I have proposed that we apply is the size, duration or impact. So fracking is a very good example where often it's claimed it's just a couple of wells. Yes, but you drill down to the wrong place and it pollutes that water table, and it can cause significant serious adverse impact far further downstream as well. Fracking actually is not something that's just a couple of wells. When you've got aggressive expansion policy that's backed by governments to go ahead with between 45,000 and 60,000 fracking wells as we have here in the UK, then we're talking about an enormous ecocide rising further down the line.
Yeah. And where are you now? What sort of support have you managed to attract over the years?
What's very interesting is, when I first proposed ecocide as an international crime, what I hadn't appreciated was that actually it already had a past history. It was going to become an international crime to stand alongside genocide when the governing document for the International Criminal Court was being drafted. It's called the Rome Statute. But at the very last minute, literally the 11th hour, it was removed as a peacetime crime as well as a wartime crime. I didn't know that when I first proposed it. That's been thanks to really great research undertaken by the School of Advanced Studies and the University of London, that further documentation was found, and it gave us a kind of back-end story to this that took it back to 1972. So my story, if you like, starts way before I even came in. Where in 1972, Olof Palme, who was then head of state for Sweden, he held the first ever conference for the environment, and he berated the United Nations in his opening speech for failing to put in place ecocide as an international crime, for dragging their feet on this. So this has a huge history that goes back through the annals of the time in terms of the creation of international crimes as well. And what is very interesting here for me is that ultimately what I'm doing is I'm taking up the baton further down the line when it was thought well and truly buried. And lo and behold, any lawyer putting their mind to this for a little bit of while would say, wait a minute, there's missing crime here. How is it that we have this position where we've got state-sanctioned industrial immunity from industries that are causing some of the worst destruction on the planet? So any lawyer giving it a bit of time would go, there's missing crime.
Yeah.
Let's get this drafted. And when I came along and proposed this and submitted a fully worked up proposal, I hadn't appreciated that this had a kind of back end story to it, and that there had already been certainly 11 years of very concentrated discourse within the United Nations with regards to the drafting. Mm-hmm. One of the issues that's really far more pertinent to today, the 21st century, is climate change.
Yeah.
And the drafting itself is not just dealing with ecological ecocide, it's also dealing with climate ecocide, which is exacerbated by dangerous industrial activity. Mm-hmm. So the carbon majors, fossil fuel companies, for instance, it's not just the dangers of and the destructive capacity of fossil fuel extraction, unconventional oil extraction, such as in the Athabasca tar sands, but it's also the exacerbation of climate change through the release of carbon emissions. In fact, with fracking, it's methane. Methane is hugely, many times more destructive than carbon emissions itself. Nevertheless, these industries are called carbon majors, and that in itself is, once we start to identify the actual carbon footprint of the dangerous industrial activity, it becomes abundantly clear that that's where we have to address responsibility on a global scale. And when it comes down to that, we're really looking at 100 or so, or a couple of hundred companies in the world. So this is about accountability of maybe a few thousand individuals being held to account who are making decisions that are threatening the very health and well-being of humanity, of future generations, the very health and well-being of all inhabitants of this earth. And that's the fulcrum, if you like. That's the area that this law attends to. It's about stopping, prohibiting, preventing and preempting the most dangerous of that industrial activity that's then exacerbating the climate change. So this is a law that deals with both facets. And indeed there actually is a third facet as well: ecological ecocide, climate ecocide, and also cultural ecocide. And that's an aspect that is often overlooked. The cultural trauma that comes with land being destroyed or forcibly taken from, you see this often in the indigenous world, the Amazon, where their peaceful enjoyment of their way of life is destroyed completely because big transnational corporations come in that have been sanctioned by the governments. They've been given the permits to go in and extract. The land is just destroyed. The communities are forced off their land. That is a cultural as well as ecological ecocide, as well as having adverse impact on climate change. This is a tragic story that happens throughout the world. It's really a corporate hijack and destruction of community way of life. For what? Driven by profit imperative, without looking to the very health and well-being of communities, of people and planet. It's a tragic story. It's a story of colonialism, and it hasn't stopped. We say that colonialism no longer exists, but it is a form of colonial destruction that continues. It's just been made lawful, that's all.
Absolutely.